what's behind all this coup d'etat and this Bush is purposely going to be discredited. This article coming out of Joseph Farah, WorldNet Daily. Remember, Joseph Farah is a National Council for National Policy member. He is a provocateur. He's calling for another revolution in his book, Next Revolution. Remember that when you read anything fear, war, and fear-mongering that's coming from his webpage. He is a plant by them to scare us, to do whatever, as Alex Jones is possibly too, as much as I like to get information from both of them to find out what's going on. But this is a man named Don Boys, who's an author, who says that you officials should be urging us to prepare for a nuclear holocaust and that we should be getting guns and gold and food and water and prepare for an attack here on our country. And we'll talk about that some other time. But that's the kind of information we have to, that's why we have Barbara on, because this all connects, this all goes back, this all has a history, and this what's happening today has all started one particular time, and there's many groups out there and front groups that are out there. And Barbara, we just appreciate all your work that you've done to help expose the conspiracy.
Thank you, Kelly. I'm glad to be here.
I was going over your Noahide law recently, under the law article, and basically reading that on May 25th, 1993, the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution with the International Criminal Tribunal, and our, of course, president signed it into law and signed in basically the Noahide laws into universal laws. Is that what this article's about?
Yes, Noahide laws were proposed by the Lubavitch organization, which all of the presidents, Republican presidents from Nixon onward, were friends with. And these are basically 6 laws or 7 laws.
I was going to say 7, yeah.
7 laws which the Orthodox Jews teach their people that the Gentiles must obey. Of course, Freemasons are considered Noahide. They're exempt from this because they're under the system of the Judeo-Freemasonry. But these Noahide laws have gained such acceptance in the government, and even George Bush Jr. has met with the Lubavitch Rebbe. But these are the laws when the Jewish Antichrist ascends the throne of a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem. These are the laws that are going to be imposed upon the Gentile world. And these laws, I think the second or third law is the prohibition of idolatry. And of course, in Judaism, Christians are considered to be idolaters because we worship Jesus Christ.
And the Noahide laws were possibly the same laws they used, of course, to kill Jesus and also to kill the disciples?
Well, I don't know if they existed then, but they did consider Jesus to be a blasphemer. He made himself equal to be God, and he was God. They didn't...
Well, they did have laws of that, and with the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees and the Talmud. I mean, they were making it, and they arrested him for that. And the disciples also. They didn't have religious freedom, which is the Noahide law has 0 religious freedom. So you worship what they say or you die.
Well, they claim that the Noahide laws go all the way back to Adam, or I'm sorry,
Noah, yeah.
Noah.
Mm-hmm.
But this, of course, is not true. But if you look in Revelation where the saints are beheaded for the Word of God and for their testimony of Jesus Christ, the manner of their manner of their death is beheading, and this is the penalty for disobedience of even one of the Noahide laws.
Well, you see they're getting the military in place to be able to enact the Noahide laws or enforce the Noahide laws. How else could they ever enforce them if they don't have enough military right here ready to do it?
Absolutely, and they're profiling and they are databasing the whole population, have been for decades.
All right, and
the way they did in the Holocaust, and they know where the Christians are.
The military did that and, through Vietnam. Any dissenters of the government, they were getting their names and address and phone numbers and labeling them as, and we've already, through the Megiddo Project, been labeled as terrorists and needing government intervention. So, and if we get real upset when we start finding out, when they start allowing, purposely, part of the planned event, to allow people to start seeing what George Bush has done and what our government's been doing for years, when it starts coming out, Americans are going to get very upset. And Christians are going to, the ones that have been deceived all these years, are going to be upset. And they might start doing things that might have an appearance of evil and cause the arresting and the beheading or killing of Christians and prisoning them.
Yes, because Christians have allied themselves with George Bush. And the way the rest of the world sees America and evangelical Christians is through George Bush. He talks about being a Christian, and this is how they believe Christians act. Of course, George Bush is an agent provocateur, and he's leading the sheep to the slaughter.
What do you think about Joseph Farah's WorldNet Daily and his provocateur measures, and a lot of fear-mongering about this new Hiroshima bomb that could possibly go off in America? And even Mobile Press, we had an editorial that next 90 days we could have a big nuclear bomb go off, or dirty nuke go off in one of our cities.
Well, of course, Joseph Farah is a member of the Council for National Policy. This is an organization that was formed to control the right-wing conservative Christians. They set policy for the Christian right. In my view, they are professional agitators. Anyone who belongs to that organization is there to take the Christians, who normally are a peace-loving people, and to foment rebellion against the government, to agitate them, to cause them to fear that their government is doing this or that. And this is the way revolutions happen. The masses are agitated and polarized, and they side up on one side or another. And the enemy, of course, is the liberals, the leftists, the commies, whoever they say the enemy is. And, of course, the left considers us the enemy, and everyone is missing who the real enemy is. That's the people at the top who are pulling all the strings.
That's right. Amen. That's for sure. Here I'm looking at Public Law 102-14, Resolution 104, March 20th, 1991, Education Day, U.S. Proclamation, a joint resolution to designate March 21st as Education Day. But in that, whereas Congress recognizes historical traditions of ethical values and principles, which our country's civilized society and nation was founded, and whereas these ethical values and principles have been the bedrock for society in the dawn of civilization, when they were known as the 7 Noahide Laws. Can you believe that's in our law? I can't believe it. Whereas these ethical values and principles of the ed of civilization stand in perilous of returning to chaos. And so here they're enacting the our House of Representatives on 1991, the Noahide Laws.
Well,
that's quite interesting.
Those laws are on the books now. They haven't acted on them, but, you know, given the right provocation, which they're going to do one of these days, they will have the legal right to enact these laws.
Well, do you think the John Birch Society folks and the Dominionist Constitution Party folks out there, the Calvinists, would like the Noahide laws to be put in place?
Well, you have to realize who the people are behind the John Birch Society and the so-called right wing. They're not really right-wingers. They're not true conservatives. They're really power elites who want to take over. And so are you asking, do they want the Noahide laws?
Yeah.
Yes, they do want them in place, because this is their right to eliminate the people that they don't want.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about today, the John Birch Society a little bit, and maybe the leader of the Council for National Policy, one of the leaders, Howard Phillips, and many of his conservative, so-called conservative groups that he started. But go ahead and start, and I'll let you just talk.
Okay. Well, I don't know if I'll get to Howard Phillips. I might touch on him. There's so much here.
Yeah, just do the John Birch today, then.
Okay. The John Birch Society, big topic. John Birch Society, of course, was the point of origin of the entire array of right-wing organizations that we see today. And the John Birch Society was a controlled opposition movement. I just want to read a quote by Anton Chaikin, which he wrote in one of his exposés. There are a lot of little brothers watching Big Brother. The quote refers to George Orwell's novel 1984, in which the dictatorial government, Big Brother, created false opposition movements secretly under its control. Orwell's novel is modeled on British Empire practice, as in Kenya, where the British set up ineffective opposition to colonialism as counter-gangs to subvert true independence movements. And the thing about false opposition movements, that they are operated. I've stopped quoting from Anton Chaikin, but they are secretly controlled by people who are part of the very opposition that they claim to be against. And their purpose is to render any opposition to their agenda as ineffective and to subvert any opposition that would arise, true opposition that would arise among the people that they are trying to control. Now, the John Birch Society was founded in 1958 by Robert Welch, who is believed to have been a 32nd degree Mason. About 20 years later, there was an expose of the John Birch Society published called the Belmont Brotherhood. This was in 1977 that a group of former high-ranking John Birch members wrote this expose of the National Council at Belmont, Massachusetts. Now, that was where the John Birch headquarters were originally located. The expose profiles 13 of the John Birch founding council members and some of the later Birch figures that were on the board of the American Opinion magazine. Now, these 13 John Birch council members, the founding members of the John Birch Society, all of them were either high-ranking Freemasons or connected directly with the Federal Reserve System, or else they were Council on Foreign Relations members. All of their credentials were the credentials of liberal, global totalitarians and power elites. Well, when these researchers who worked for Robert Welch and these National Council discovered this, they were very angry, and they wrote the Belmont Brotherhood. And the head of this committee was Nicholas Bove. He analyzed the whole situation at the end of the Belmont Brotherhood expose. He wrote, "You may object. Look at all the great things Robert Welch has done. He has exposed the Illuminati. Baloney. The Illuminati was merely a branch of the conspiracy. How can one attack the Illuminati without attacking the diabolical power behind it, organized Freemasonry? Welch has provided the most valuable service of all time to the conspiracy. He founded an organization to neutralize millions of Americans from discovering the true power behind the Illuminati. And we can see that the Masons chose an extremely clever man to do the job. Welch, with the help of the Belmont Brotherhood, plays his role very effectively." And indeed he did. And Robert Welch was very soft on Freemasonry. In his writings, he said that the Freemasons were a very patriotic group of American citizens. And here the John Birch founding council was infested with Freemasons. So when you think of the right wing that we have today, remember that it was launched by a group of Freemasons with attachments to the Council on Foreign Relations and the Federal Reserve System, to Rockefeller, to Morgan, to all of the power elites that have this agenda for world domination. Now, Robert Welch died in 1983, and he was succeeded upon his death by former Congressman Larry McDonald. Now, Congressman McDonald also died in the same year in the downing of the Korean airliner KAL-007. It was over Russian airspace, and the excuse was that the airliner had trespassed into Soviet airspace and was shot down. However, there is a lot of suspicion that this was not the case. Larry McDonald, in 1979, he founded what is called the Western Goals Foundation. And the Western Goals was a front for the John Birch Society Intelligence Network. Western Goals was an intelligence front. It was directed by McDonald until his death in 1983, and it went defunct in 1986 after a power struggle that I won't go into here. But Larry McDonald had strong ties to the Korean CIA, which worked with our CIA. He also had ties to the Reverend Sun Myung Moon, the leader of the Unification Church, which is just a cover for the Korean intelligence operations, and also the Korean military, the South Korean military. But Larry McDonald also was well connected with Hitler's Nazi network, which I'll go into in a minute. McDonald also took over the massive computerized files of Senator Joe McCarthy, that raving anti-communist who had the government investigating private citizens. Now, people believe that all of this was done in the name of preserving American freedom, but the facts show that what was going on was a massive espionage operation on the American people. Now, the files that Senator McCarthy compiled, dossiers on private citizens, passed into the hands of Larry McDonald and the Western Goals Foundation. Millions of names of people worldwide were in this database, and I'd like to look now at some of the connections of the Western Goals Foundation besides Joe McCarthy, because it will illuminate what this anti-communism movement was all about. Now, Western Goals worked with one of Adolf Hitler's chief intelligence officers. His name was Reinhard Gehlen. In 1945, as the war was ending, Gehlen offered the United States his considerable experience, expertise, and archives on Russia and the satellite countries in return for immunity from prosecution as a war criminal. And I'm going to read from the Interhemispheric Resource Center file on Western Goals. McDonald formed a foundation branch, that's a branch of the Western Goals Foundation in West Germany in 1981. It was financed by 1/3 of Western Goals' operating budget. The German affiliate is Western Goals Europe, EV. This German branch is also known as the American European Strategy Institute. Sounds like a nice name. But it acknowledges working with Reinhard Gehlen, a former Nazi, who had been honored by the elite Catholic organization, the Knights of Malta. It seems the Knights of Malta gave its highest honor of award to Gehlen, this Nazi war criminal, in 1948. And Gehlen was not even a Catholic. He was honored because of his efforts in the, and I quote, crusade against godless communism. Now, Gehlen headed Adolf Hitler's spy operations against the Soviet Union during World War II. After the war, he and his spy apparatus staffed mostly by former Nazis, were recruited by our CIA, and he became the first director of the Bund in West Germany, which was West Germany's intelligence agency. So here we have the whole Nazi apparatus brought into our country, and they staffing our Central Intelligence Agency, our FBI, and Reinhard Gehland allowed to go back to Germany and set up an intelligence operation there, which collaborated not only with our CIA, but with Western Goals, which was an offshoot of the John Birch Society. Now, also, another connection within the John Birch Society was an Israeli espionage agent. And we're going to see how all of this ties together as I get into this a little more. Maybe not today, but it all does tie together, I believe. John Rees was one of the earliest members of the Western Goals Foundation. He wrote all of its publications, and he was the principal espionage agent for Western Goals. He was also a member of the John Birch Society. His wife had worked with Joe McCarthy and Roy Cohn, McCarthy's Jewish lawyer. Instrumental in obtaining Rees' entrance to Western Goals was a man by the name of J. Peter Grace. Now, J. Peter Grace is a pivotal character in all of this neo-Nazi network that not only was transferred to the United States, but fanned out into the whole world, a worldwide fascist network. J. Peter Grace was the chairman of the Order of the Knights of Malta in the United States. He was also the president of W.R. Grace and Company, which brought over Nazi emigres, employed them in his company or found positions for them in the United States government or in other companies like his own chemical company. J. Peter Grace is profiled in Who's Who in America. He had a bachelor's degree from Yale University. In 1936, he was a member of the elite Newcomen Society, which connected with Rockefeller and all of the power elites. J. Peter Grace was on the Council of Foreign Relations, the CFR. And here we see something very suspicious. A Knight of Malta, working for the John Birch Society's Western Goals Foundation, which claimed to be a radical right-wing organization protecting the United States from communism, and a major figure working with Western Goals was this J. Peter Grace, who is CFR. Now, a little more about J. Peter Grace. The Grace Company, of which he was the president, was more than 30% owned by Germany's Flick Financial Corporation. Now, the Flick Financial Corporation was a consortium of conservative businessmen. The Flick Group funded the Nazi Party's rise to power in pre-war Germany. In addition, Grace was a close associate of Otto Ambros of Germany's IG Farben, which was the developer of the Zyklon B gas used in the concentration camps. And I'm reading, that quote was from an article called "This Private Spy Agency." It was an expose of the Western Goals Foundation. Getting back to J. Peter Grace, he was also the overseer of an intelligence operation called Project Paperclip. This was a post-World War II CIA arrangement to remove classified information from the dossiers of former Nazis. Because of his Project Paperclip, more than 900 Nazi scientists and a great number of Hitler's dreaded SS, the stormtroopers, emigrated to the United States, and these war criminals would find employment within government agencies and companies such as W.R. Grace. There was a close relationship between J. Peter Grace, Reinhard Gehland, the CIA, the Knights of Malta, and the Vatican, which by this time was a front for the House of Rothschild. And they were all working together to smuggle these Nazi war criminals out of Europe into various countries. Now, Grace was also associated with Radio Liberty and Radio Free Enterprise, Radio Free Europe, and these were enterprises established by Reinhard Gehlen and funded by the CIA. Now, the W.R. Grace and company brought over these Nazi emigres to the United States, but what was their agenda? If you study the history of W.R. Grace and many of these power elites, you can see the global expansion of the corporate network, and specifically in our own continent, the penetration of Latin America. And this was the region that the Knights of Malta would rebuild the Nazi network and conduct fascist operations in Latin America. And that has been going on since probably the Second World War, when this Nazi network was brought over to North America. J. Peter Grace is also a leading figure on David Rockefeller's Council for Latin America. And, of course, the Rockefellers have been the powerhouse behind the corporate takeover of Latin America. And we're going to get into the death squads and the psychological manipulation, the terrorist groups, and the revolutions that were fomented by these corporate power elites to destabilize South America and to bring it under the control, basically, of the Illuminati. But I should say a few things about the Knights of Malta because they're very important. The Knights of Malta is a fascist order that started in Europe. It was comprised of several thousand knights in Europe and in North, Central, and South America. And according to the Covert Action Information Bulletin, the Knights of Malta participated in the Crusades. They go back as far as the Crusades, and they worked alongside with the Knights Templar and the Teutonic Knights in the takeover of the Holy Land. So they've had a long history of causing trouble and causing revolution. They're agents provocateurs par excellence. The Knights of Malta are recruited among the European aristocracy, and they soon controlled the extensive estates throughout the continent of Europe. And they were the order that assimilated all of the holdings and the estates of the Knights Templar when that order was dissolved in the early 14th century. So I think here we have a situation where the Knights Templar, which of course were part of the Merovingian conspiracy, they had been discredited in Europe, and so the Illuminati, the Priori de Zion over there controlling everything, had to phase out the Knights Templar, and they had to bring in another order with a better reputation to take its place and to do its dirty work. And this is often the case with front groups. When one front group is exposed or discredited, they are put out of business. They go underground. They disappear. And another front group with a shining record of virtue takes its place. And, of course, there's no virtue in any of these front groups. They're all merely controlled opposition fronts from the same diabolical conspiracy at the top. But the Knights of Malta developed connections with the Masonic P2 Lodge and the Priori de Zion. They are connected to, and they've all been linked to the hierarchy of the Vatican, which of course was taken over by the House of Rothschild in the last century. The Knights of Malta endorsed Mussolini, the fascist dictator of Italy, in 1926, and they've worked with the fascist P2 Masonic Lodge in Italy in this century. The Knights of Malta also facilitated Hitler's assumption of power in Germany. Many of our, if probably most of our CIA directors and deputy directors have been Knights of Malta. Good examples are William Casey and James Angleton. The Knights of Malta are an hereditary order. They are very aristocratic, and they must be able to display a family coat of arms. They have to prove a genealogy that dates back at least 300 years in an unbroken succession from father to son. So here you see they're all part of this Merovingian bloodline conspiracy, which is conspiring to put their man on the throne of a rebuilt temple in Jerusalem and claim to be the Messiah in place of Jesus Christ, of course. The Knights of Malta are very powerful. They are actually a sovereign state in their own right. The sovereign Grand Master of the Knights of Malta is recognized as a head of state. His authority is ensured because he is ranked as a prince in the world, and he has the ecclesiastical ranking as a cardinal. So he has the protection of the Vatican, and also in the secular world. Under international law, the Knights of Malta has independent sovereign status, so that their members their loyalty is to the Order of Malta and not to any nations in which they live. The Knights of Malta also have permanent observer status at the United Nations. Now, the key spheres of control for the Knights of Malta that we know of have been Africa and Latin America. And the Knights of Malta have included many of the fascist dictators that have arisen in Latin America. General Pinochet, who became the murderous dictator of Chile, is a Knight of Malta. And the Knights of Malta were also behind the support and the supplying of the Contras in Nicaragua. The whole Latin American operation has been facilitated by these Knights of Malta. Now, we have to get into this Latin American takeover because it's really a precursor of what is going to happen in the United States. There's been virtually a blackout in our news media on what has been transpiring in Latin America for the last 40 or 50 years. But there have been books and articles written on the takeover of Latin America by the Knights of Malta squads that they have used to murder innocent people in Latin America, people that were considered threat to their takeover. Also, their total destabilization of the region, overthrowing governments claiming that they are communist, and maybe they were. But in Latin America, you just see a cauldron of the dialectic being played out. And really, the incubator for the death squads that I believe, and others do too, are in the United States and preparing for the same kind of operation. And I believe that this is what the militia movement is all about. And it all ties in with the Council for National Policy, Larry Pratt, and Howard Phillips, big promoters of the militia movement. But when you realize what the background of all of this is, how the death squads destabilized Latin America, destabilized the governments, that is exactly what is taking place in the United States. I kind of feel that Latin America was really a laboratory for what is about to happen in the United States. But I don't have a lot of time left, but I just want to talk about one organization that was connected with the Western Goals, operation of the John Birch Society, AmeriCares, just as an example of how right and left work together to destabilize Latin America. AmeriCares worked with Oliver North's network by raising money for aid to Central America. The agency in charge of distributing this aid was the Order of Malta. And so J. Peter Grace was enlisted asked to have his Knights of Malta distribute this aid in Central America through their field organization in El Salvador and Guatemala and Honduras. Now, these were where the death squads were operating, destabilizing the governments. Now, AmeriCares was founded in 1982 by Prescott Bush, Jr. This is the brother of George H.W. Bush, that's senior. Prescott Bush was a Knight of Malta. George Bush, Sr. was CFR. The advisory committee of AmeriCares, on it, the chairman was J. Peter Grace, who was CFR, William E. Simon, who was CFR, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was CFR, Bilderberger, and Trilateral Commission. Now, keep in mind that this is supposed to be a right-wing organization helping to get the communists out of Latin America. Also on the board of AmeriCares was Barbara Bush, whose husband was CFR. On the advisory committee was Colin Powell, also CFR, and Saul M. Linowitz, who's also CFR and Trilateral Commission. Now, Saul Linowitz was in business with David Rockefeller, really who the Rockefeller family set up the CFR. So you begin to look at this and you think, well, I thought this was a right-wing organization helping to boot the commies out of South America. And really, it's not. These are power elites whose intention was to take over South America, and that's exactly what they've done. And probably the next time, I don't have a lot of time now, but I need to get into the World Anti-Communist League and how these fascist operations were conducted in South America, Latin America, Central America, how they accomplished the takeover, and what we have in store for us here in the United States, and how the right wing has been part of the agitation for revolution in America.
And to destabilize, I guess when they destabilize the government and the countries in South America, basically through revolution, or what happened down there? Barbara?
Well, they had this right-wing network in force in place in the United States, mm-hmm. and they were funding all of this revolution in Latin America mm-hmm. through our evangelical ministers. Pat Roberts yep. was a big one for raising funds for fascist dictators who took over the governments of Latin America. And what they did was they went down there, they did the same thing that they did in the Holocaust. They just eliminated people who were opposed to their program, people who were figuring it out, anyone who was a threat to their takeover of Latin America. Then they put people like Augusto Pinochet in the government of Chile. And, of course, he was a mass murderer. What followed during his regime was a genocide within Chile. And, of course, this happened in other countries in Latin America, Nicaragua, El Salvador. And they also had the death squads. If you were a dissenter, if you were in any way a threat, they had death squads in place